Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the trip that I took during the summer of 2017 to Australia. I left for Australia on July 31st and got back from Australia on August 28th, so I spent about a month there. Now, leaving on July 31st in the United States meant that I actually got to Australia 2 days later on August 2nd in Australia, because it does take a long time to get there. I had to fly from New York to Tokyo first, and then Tokyo down to Sydney. So I'm going to talk about what I did each place that I went to. So my first stop was Sydney, like I said, so I flew from New York to Tokyo, and then Tokyo down to Sydney. So once in Sydney, I stayed at a place called the Maze Backpackers. It was fine. I mean, I stayed in hostels the entire time I was there. I never stayed in anything fancier. And hostels are great, in my opinion. They're not for everybody. They're not for somebody that doesn't want to rough it a little bit. But I like hostels. I also splurged a little bit and stayed in private rooms just because I enjoy having my own space. So I stayed in private rooms, which honestly I think makes it fine, because how much time are you spending in your room while you're traveling anyway? So I landed in Sydney, checked into my hostel, grabbed a bite to eat, and then honestly crashed. I basically slept almost the entire day just because of jet lag and stuff, so I didn't really start doing things until August the 3rd. On August 3rd, I had booked a tour of the Sydney Opera House, which I did and I loved. It was very informative and it was beautiful on the inside. The rest of my time in Sydney, I didn't book anything. I just kind of explored on my own. So I walked around a lot and I ended up finding a very cool museum called the Rock Museum, I believe, and I really enjoyed it. It was about Indigenous people in Australia, which I thought was very interesting. I did a lot of walking around and exploring and kind of just wandering around the city, which is the kind of touristy stuff that I like to do. While I was there, I also did the Harbour Bridge, so I walked across it. I did not go to the top because I was a little afraid to. I think this time around I will go to the top because I'll be there for a year. In Australia for a year, not in Sydney for a year, so I feel like I should do it this time around. I also went to Bondi Beach and did the coastal walk, which was really pretty. I would really recommend doing it. It's a short bus ride from Sydney. That was my time in Sydney. I was only there for a couple of days because I had planned other bits of my trip. So on Saturday, August 6th, I went from Sydney to Brisbane and I flew. It wasn't that long of a flight. The only reason that I went to Brisbane was so that I could go to the Australia Zoo. The Australia Zoo is actually located in a town called Beerwah, which is about an hour outside of Brisbane, which I knew at the time, but Australia Greyhound has a bus that gets you from Brisbane to Beerwah. So I did all of my Australia Zoo booking before I got to Australia, because the Australia Zoo offers a lot of really great encounters with the animals, and I wanted to make sure I got the ones that I wanted. So I had a red panda encounter, which was first thing in the morning. It was actually before the zoo opened. Then I had a koala encounter where I got to hold and cuddle with a koala. Then I had a cheetah encounter where I got to have my photo taken with a cheetah and pet the cheetah a little bit. And then I got a rhino encounter, which same thing, I got to pet him and just be with him, which was wonderful. So it wasn't until I arrived in Brisbane that I realized there was a little hiccup in my plan. I went to the Greyhound station and asked if I could get a ticket, a bus ticket that would get me to the Australia Zoo. I needed to be there before the zoo opened. And that's when they told me that no, the buses only get you there at opening time, not before then. So I ended up having to take a train from Brisbane to Beerwah, which wasn't that big of a deal. If you watch my Australia Zoo vlog, which I'll put in the cards above, you'll see that it meant that I had to take a very, very early train in order to get there on time, but it was absolutely worth it. I took a very early train from Brisbane to Beerwah, and then a bus from the Beerwah train station to the Australia Zoo. So my Australia Zoo day was wonderful, and then at the end of the day, I took a Greyhound bus home from the Australia Zoo. While in Brisbane, I stayed at a place called Cool. I was supposed to stay at a place that was next door to it called Big Bird Backpackers, but they upgraded me for some reason to their sister hostel, which was just next door, so it's not like I had to walk very far, thank goodness. And then the next day I left Brisbane because there wasn't really anything in Brisbane I wanted to do except the Australia Zoo. But so the next day I headed up to Cairns. So on the 8th I headed up to Cairns. Again, I flew. If I could do it again and had more time, I think I would have taken a bus and stopped more along the Gold Coast, because I didn't do any of the Gold Coast at all. So that's kind of on my bucket list for this next year in Australia. I want to do more of the Gold Coast and kind of stop in those towns along the way, because I've heard they're really lovely. So Cairns is really just there for the Great Barrier Reef. It's a very club-centric city though, it seems like. The nightlife seemed to be very lively. I did go out with people from my Great Barrier Reef tour that night, and it was pretty fun. So I did do a Great Barrier Reef boat tour, because the Great Barrier Reef, you do have to take a boat to get to the reef, unlike Ningaloo, where you can just walk from the beach to the reef, which is really cool. The tour I did was with a company called the Sunshine Tour or something like that. Put the name and logo right here. They were really good. I was one of the only American people on the boat. It seemed to attract a lot of Korean and Japanese tourists, so everything on the boat was also in Korean and Japanese, which was kind of cool. But it also meant that because of that, I was one of the only English-speaking people on the boat, which is how I became close with the people who were giving the tour. So I ended up going to drinks with them that night. I forgot to mention that while I was in Cairns, I stayed at a place called Jazz Cairns, which was actually quite nice. I enjoyed it, except there were some ants, which was kind of gross, but it's not that big of a deal. So I did that on the 9th, and then on the 10th I headed to Alice Springs. So in the early part of my trip I did a lot of hopping around. It was very, very fast paced, because I was trying to kind of fit in things very quickly, because there were things at the end of my trip that I wanted to spend more time doing. So like I said, on the 10th I headed to Alice Springs, which Alice Springs is a tiny, tiny town. If you're not familiar with Australia, it's in the Northern Territory, basically right dead in the center of it, and it is an extremely small town. There was very bad Wi-Fi and cell reception in Alice Springs. So while in Alice Springs, I stayed in a hostel the night that I arrived, and then the next morning I woke up very early to start my rock tour, which was through Australia Greyhound. And it was incredible. I loved the rock tour. It was probably my favorite part of the trip. I say that very tentatively, because towards the end of my trip I did something really incredible as well. So the rock tour consisted of 3 days and 2 nights in the Uluru area. So it's a 6-hour drive from Alice Springs. So there was a group of about 20 of us, and then one tour guide whose name was Patrick. He was amazing. I absolutely adored him. He really made us feel like a family. And I know that sounds so silly, because you were only with these people for 3 days, but it was such a lovely time, honestly, and I think a big part of it was we were with a really nice group of people, so I had a blast. So the first day we did Kings Canyon, which was beautiful, and you start that with a climb called Heart Attack Hill, which really kind of scared me, because I am not the most fit person in the world, or athletically gifted or anything, so I was very nervous that I was going to kind of make a fool of myself and look really silly. But honestly, it wasn't that bad. I could very easily walk it while chatting with somebody, so I was very comfortable with that. And that's the hardest bit of climbing that you do on this particular tour, so it's not anything I think that anyone should worry about, especially because I did it in August, which is winter in Australia, so it wasn't that hot. During the summer, our guide told us that there are portions of the climb that you don't do, because it gets so hot in northern Australia, because it's that much closer to the equator. So it was definitely warm while I was there, but it wasn't brutally hot like you couldn't breathe or you felt like you couldn't do it. But it was warm. Most people were in shorts. I did wear athletic pants, because I just like to have my skin covered when I'm climbing and stuff, because I feel like it protects my legs better, which I was happy I did, because some people did get pricked by plants. The second day we went to another park. We did not go to Uluru that night. We went to a park, I'm gonna look at the name so I can say it correctly. Kata Tujata, I'm gonna put the name here. And that was another bit of climbing that we could do. Absolutely beautiful. It was just one of those things that just felt so cool to do. And so we climbed that, which was really cool. And then that night we went to Uluru for dinner and to watch the sunset near Uluru. So we weren't at Uluru, we were just watching the sunset behind Uluru while watching the sunset near Uluru while we ate dinner, which was really, really cool. Yeah, so after watching the sunset at Uluru, the next morning we woke up very early to watch the sun rise at Uluru, which was absolutely beautiful, and then we went to Uluru itself. And Uluru itself, for those of you who are not aware, is actually a sacred bit of Aboriginal ground. And there is a chain along part of the top of Uluru that was actually installed by a private citizen, not the Australian government. People climb Uluru, which is actually very disrespectful to the Aboriginal people. There are signs that ask you not to climb it because, one, it is very dangerous. So even if you don't want to be respectful of other people's cultures, which I don't know why you wouldn't, it's dangerous and like self-preservation, you shouldn't do it. But also you shouldn't do it because it is disrespectful to the Aboriginal people of Australia, and they have very nicely asked us not to do it. While in Uluru, we did not climb Uluru. Our guide said that he was not going to encourage any of us to do it and that he would discourage all of us to do it, and he was great because he really pointed out how this land is sacred and it's amazing, and this is a, you know, earth-made thing that will only be around once, and there's already damage to Uluru because of all the people that climb it, which is really sad. And he made a really good point that no matter if you're Catholic or not, if you go to Notre Dame in Paris, you walk in and you're quiet and you're respectful and you respect the fact that it is somebody's holy place. But because Uluru came from the ground naturally, people for some reason don't have that same level of respect, which I hadn't really thought of before, and I think he made a really good point. There's only going to be one Uluru. You can't rebuild it if people break it. And there's already damage, like I said, that's been done to Uluru and the surrounding water because of people. So we did not climb it. We instead did the footpath around the base of it, which you are allowed to do and they encourage you to do. It's beautiful to see all the sides of Uluru. There are certain sections that they ask you not to take pictures. So if you're going to be a good tourist, then you should respect that. And everyone in my group respected that, which was very, very nice. So we were with a really good group of people. During the 3-day, 2 nights, the first night we slept literally under the stars, which was amazing. There's no light pollution in that area, so you could see every star and the Milky Way, and it was beautiful. I tried to take pictures and none of them did it any justice at all. So I really want to go back and get a good camera and take some pictures because it was so beautiful. I need photographic evidence of the beauty that I saw. It actually made me cry. It was so beautiful. So that's the level of beauty we're talking here. The second night we slept at a campsite. We still slept in, they're called swags. We still slept in swags on the ground, but we were at a campsite. So there was running water and toilets, which is nice. Because the first night there was not, and I had to pee outside for the first time since I was like 8. So that was interesting to say the least. So after our day at Uluru, we drove back to Alice Springs. That night we had dinner as a group, which was very, very fun. And then I slept in my hostel, and the next morning I woke up and made my way to Adelaide. So Adelaide was something I was really looking forward to because I was meeting up with an old friend who I hadn't seen since I was a junior in high school. His name is Kimmin. He's wonderful, and he is Australian. He came to Connecticut and did a year abroad his junior year of high school. So he spent the entirety of his junior year of high school in Connecticut, and he was in my grade. And we were pretty good friends then. He's one of those people that I feel like is friends with everybody. And I told him I was coming to Australia because I did want to meet up with him. And then he, you know, being just the sweetheart that he is, let me stay with his family while I was in Adelaide, which was so nice. I got to Adelaide, he picked me up from the airport, which was really nice, and then the next day we started the drive of the Great Ocean Road, which connects Adelaide and Melbourne. So we drove the Great Ocean Road together. It took 2 days. So we did that. We saw the 13 Apostles. We did a bunch of the stops, and it was really beautiful. And it was a lot of fun just spending time with an old high school friend and talking about, you know, people from high school that we remembered or maybe we're still in touch with. Turns out neither of us are in touch with anybody and all that stuff. And then we got to Melbourne, where we stayed with one of his cousins, which was very nice of them to let us stay at their house. We walked around Melbourne for a day. We kind of went to the shopping district. We went to this really cool bar. I don't remember the name of it now, I'm sorry, but it was really cool. It was like at the top of a building, and it was very like kind of hard to find the entrance. It was a blast. And then we went back to Adelaide. We drove Fastway and spent more time with his family, and I got to hang out with his friends and stuff. So my week in Adelaide wasn't as touristy as my other weeks just because I was with a friend. So I did a lot of like hanging out with him and his friends, hanging out with his family. Like his family took me to the beach. Like we kind of did that stuff, which was great. After 2 weeks of really touristy things, it was nice to have a week of just being with people and hanging out. So after my week in Adelaide/Melbourne with Kimmin, I flew to Perth. And Perth was really cool. So kind of like, again, backtracking a little bit, during my time at the Great Barrier Reef, the snorkeling instructor, his name was Eric, he's actually English, he told me that I had to go to Ningaloo, which I found out was close to Perth. Close to Perth. So my first day in Perth, I go to the Perth Visitor Center and I say, is there any way I can get to Ningaloo? I need to be back in Perth by this day. So whatever you can do to get me back, like there and back, that would be great. And I found out at the Perth Visitor Center that Ningaloo not only is known for its beautiful reefs, but it's also known for whale sharks, which is pretty cool. So I got all excited. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get to swim with whale sharks. You know, that's so exciting. And then they called the company that they book through, which is called Ningaloo Discovery. I highly recommend them. And they asked, oh, are you still getting whale sharks in the season? Because it was a little late in the season. And they said, no, we're not getting any whale sharks really anymore. We're not booking tours anymore because it's just not fair to people. You know, there's nothing to see. So I was kind of disappointed. And then the woman on the phone says, but we are doing humpback whale tours. And I just kind of froze. I was like, excuse me? The Australian government did this temporary 2-year trial, and it was the second year of it, where you can go swimming with humpback whales during their migration, which is so cool. You can't be with the babies because it's not safe, obviously. It's only for 2 years, and if it doesn't go well, then they won't do it ever again. So I don't know what they decided, but I got to go, and that's all I really care about. So I immediately booked it, and it honestly wasn't as expensive as you'd think it was. It was only about $320 Australian to do the humpback whale tour, and that included lunch and snacks and all the equipment and like 500 pictures, full digital quality as well, that I got to download and do whatever I want with, and I'll be putting during this video and etc., which was really cool. So I took a 17-hour bus ride from Perth up to Exmouth, which is where the Ningaloo Reef is. I stayed in a hostel in Exmouth, which was right across from the Exmouth Visitor Center. Then I did my Ningaloo Discovery Day, which was absolutely incredible. Before we got in the water, mama humpback whale brought her baby right up to the boat, and they said by the coloring you could tell it was only a couple weeks old, which was amazing. I don't have any pictures, sadly, because all my stuff was in a bag, so I don't have any pictures of that, but it was amazing and I loved it. And then I got in the water a bunch and I saw a bunch of humpback whales. I probably saw 6 of them. They swam right underneath me, they swam right next to me. It was amazing. I saw a giant manta ray, which swam right underneath me. So there is a really cool picture that I'm gonna put right here of this ray swimming underneath me, and you can see me right at the top. I was the only person who wore white flippers, so you could tell who I was in every picture, which was really cool. So that was an amazing day. And then the next day I went on a smaller boat and went out a little bit into the reef and just did some snorkeling, which I loved. I really like snorkeling. I like being in the water. I love the ocean. So it was a lot of fun. The only bad thing about that day was I did get stung by a jellyfish pretty badly on my neck. I had some welts and stuff, but I was fine. It just hurt. There were little kids with me, so I was very much pretending that it didn't hurt nearly as bad as it did because they were scared and they were like, oh my gosh, you know, ah, and I was like, no, I'm fine. Look, I'm fine. It's just, you know, stuck in my hair and all over my body. I flew from Exmouth back down to Perth. Didn't really feel like taking another 17-hour bus ride because that is a really long bus ride. And then the next day, which was my last day in Perth. So I was going to spend 6 days in Perth approximately. So I had 1 day of walking around and booking that humpback whale thing. Then I had a day of doing more walking around and then getting up to Exmouth. I had 2 days in Exmouth. So I got back from Exmouth on a Saturday. That Saturday night, I actually ended up getting dinner with 2 people that I met on my humpback whale tour because they also happened to go back to Perth. So I got dinner with them, and then the next day we decided we were gonna spend the day together. On Sunday we went to the Fremantle markets, which are in Perth, and it was really fun. It was a really great last day, and then they drove me to the airport and I headed back home. So that was really fast, obviously, kind of description of the 4 weeks I had. And I honestly loved every second. My top 3 were the Australia Zoo, the rock tour, and swimming with humpback whales. For sure, were my top 3. That was my 4 weeks in Australia. I loved my time there. I didn't stay in a bad hostel. I didn't have really any bad experiences with hostels or food or anything. I was very lucky. And honestly, the cost of the trips for 4 weeks and all of the stuff I did really wasn't that bad. So that's what I did during my 4 weeks. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to talk more specifically about where I stayed and stuff. Like I said, I didn't have any bad experiences. Everybody I met was very nice. Everything was clean. Everything was well kept. So in that sense, I don't really have any horror stories or places to avoid or anything. Yeah, it was a great 4 weeks. And the things I did during those 4 weeks are kind of helping to shape what I want to do while I'm in Australia for a year. I want to go back to Uluru, but I think this time maybe I'll do it with just some friends. I want to go back to the Gold Coast area and really do the Gold Coast, not just do Cairns. I'd love to go back to Perth and spend more time in Perth because I really didn't do that much stuff in Perth other than like walk around and kind of shop and that kind of stuff. I'd really like to go do the more touristy things just because I haven't done them. So yeah, so that was my time in Australia. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Bye.